ASEAN believes that differences between states should be resolved through dialogue and engagement
in China
rather than confrontation,
had to be imported.
isolation.
But when people get used to it, they think and they realize that it's a lot better to use gas. And the other part that was really good was that education. People were educated, were told about what caused this PM 2.5 pollution, and young people started to look out for cleaner solutions, and people started to do engineering studies on pollution reduction and pollution control. So I think education is a very significant portion of what goes into a society to move toward a greener future. This is a story that I want to tell that is now reality. We have a situation in which China is moving heavily into solar, and the solar power plants are getting bigger and bigger. As I mentioned before, 1 gigawatt is 1.5 million panels. Now, if you have panels, they have to be maintained. They have to be maintained how? To make sure that it doesn't crack, or there are cracks which have to be solved, and then the chips inside are still functioning properly, the wires inside are not broken. But for things which are sitting out in the air with water, rain, with sun, with sand possibly, of course things will crack, things will go wrong. As my friend here knows, if one cracks seriously, the entire line stops producing. The whole row of panels stops producing. And that's very significant in terms of efficiency of production of electricity for solar panels. So in China, talk about ingenious solutions. They found a way of doing this without having to have people with a monitor checking one panel by one panel. 1.5 million panels takes a long time to check. They're using drones. And the drones will flash a near-infrared light on the panels and take a photo. And then using AI, they can decipher which panels are in what shape. Are they okay? And then immediately they can address the defunct panel, the panel that is having problems. So in addition to new and renewable sources of energy, drones, AI, these are things that are all contributing to improve the situation in the sector. I think this is something that really should be spread as broadly as possible worldwide, because from what I know, in the Middle East, the building of large-scale solar farms are more prevalent than micro-scale or distributed. And that means if you don't maintain them properly, then you're wasting your money. I prepared some other things on China, but I don't think I should talk about China much more. But the only thing that I would like to talk about in this context. Oh, this is an interesting slide. I forgot about this slide. Solar farms. This is in Ningxia province. It is a Gobi Desert. It is a desert condition. Because of the solar farm, wind supply, the amount of wind was reduced by 50%. So as a result, grass started to grow. And grass, when dried up, becomes very dangerous to fire. So what happens? They started raising sheep or goats to eat the grass. So now this solar farm actually has 20,000 goats. So the farmers around are actually very, very happy that this is possible. I think there are a couple of things on the horizon which are significant. I think it's important to think about what China can do for the rest of the world in this context. I have a story to tell about that, speaking to a very senior OAU official. He talked about the growth of Africa in the last decade. And he said, Charles, we have to thank Shenzhen. I said, what? Thank Shenzhen. Why Shenzhen? He said, the last 10 years, Africa developed very quickly. One reason is because of the development of smartphones. Smartphones, meaning Huawei and ZTE building out the 4G network in Africa. And the suppliers of Shenzhen, because of their manufacturing capacity, was able to produce cell phones, smartphones, for $45 a piece for Africa. Now, why is that significant? Because the Africans, 90% of them didn't have bank accounts. They couldn't do financial transactions. But with smartphones, they were able to do financial transactions. They were able to do information flows and contacts and study more about the rest of the world. So he said, Shenzhen is able to do this, and it's been very helpful to Africa. And I'm hoping that in new and renewable sources of energy, same thing could happen. Same thing could happen where China's economies of scale and manufacturing prowess could help the rest of the world in the same way. I call this the Chinese way of bringing everybody in through abundance instead of keeping people out through scarcity. For UAE, I think UAE has abundance of capital, especially long-term capital, and UAE also has something which I think is really sorely needed in a lot of countries, that is a vision. Looking at what UAE has done in the sector of AI, which is something that we've been following very, very closely in China as well, it is definitely a country where the leadership has vision and is looking forward to innovation at the very tip of the pyramid. And I hope UAE can work with China in this context. You have deployable capital, but even more than that, your investments have given you a lot of IP rights. And these IP rights, if you leave it in the laboratories, it doesn't do very good, doesn't do very much good. But if it's combined with China's manufacturing prowess and its capacity to deliver to the rest of the world, I think will be very, very valuable. Thank you.
And this was another episode of China Now, a show that opens a window to the present and future of Cuban. But also societies in the majority of the states throughout the world, including dozens of NGOs within the United States itself and in other countries, who oppose this nefarious practice of stifling the will of the Cuban people. This embargo is wreaking immense damage to the economy of that country, impeding the delivery by its government of large-scale socioeconomic reforms. Today, many have reiterated these staggering figures that the cumulative damage to the Cuban economy is assessed to be $164 billion. This is a heavy burden which lies primarily on the shoulders of the people of the island, curbing opportunities to advance their legitimate interests and aspirations. Once again, we emphasize that the blockade affects ordinary people and their children. Their rights have been violated for decades. And at the same time, the U.S. delegations at the United Nations endlessly reiterate slogans about the U.S. government's alleged commitment to international obligations in the area of international law and human rights and in development assistance, as well as in the area of, quote unquote, the protection of the needs and interests of succeeding generations. Turning to the attempts by the U.S. to portray Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, these are completely and utterly delusional. This step by the government of the United States has nothing to do whatsoever with international efforts to counter terrorism or its sponsors. This is merely a reflection of the United States' politically motivated cynicism, the perpetuation of the unlawful, inhumane embargo against the island of freedom. Cuba has been conscientiously fulfilling its international obligations. It has been helping to find political solutions. It has been advocating for the maintenance of peace and security. We believe that a definitive end to the embargo will benefit the peoples both of Cuba and those of the United States, and will on the whole help to improve international relations at the regional and global levels. Our position remains unchanged, and we are guided by the core principles of the Charter of the United Nations about the inadmissibility of any discriminatory measures and intervention in the domestic affairs of states. And on that basis, we call for the immediate lifting of the embargo and for Cuba to be removed from the United States list of state sponsors of terrorism. In the next few days, a few days ago, the corresponding statement was, as per custom, issued by the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation. This is a call which we will circulate as an official document of the General Assembly. To conclude, we support the draft resolution tabled by our Cuban colleagues on this matter, and we urge all delegations to also vote in favor of it. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative